in office when he did some things that many found objectionable but never objected to. But now that he is costing Republicans some seats in the Capitol, governor's offices, senators' seats, he's a problem for the Republican Party.
And Kari Lake has been his golden child. We don't know what the future will be in terms of lawsuits and all of that, which could likely be coming. But at some point now that Kari Lake has lost, if Donald Trump announces tomorrow, do you think that Kari Lake will be one of his top choices as possible for vice president?
Hard to say. Hard to say how voters would look at Kari Lake after this election campaign. She was clearly going to the right the whole time. We often ask, candidates often go to the left or the right during primaries. General election rolls around, they typically move toward the center. Kari Lake never did that. She was just going solidly, hardcore at the Republican base, at the Trump supporters. Certainly she won more of what many would consider mainstream Republicans, but when you look at the results, and this is a really story that isn't maybe told enough, the Republicans lost Maricopa County. The Democrats outperformed Joe Biden, his victory in Maricopa County in 2020, which was the first by a Democratic presidential nominee in 72 years. And the Democratic slate in this election all lead the Trump ticket in Maricopa County. It's the state's largest county, the source of 6 of every 10 votes. You've got to win Maricopa County. She didn't do it, despite all that charisma, despite all those appearances on national TV. Again, you have to wonder, voters looked at her with a very discerning eye and maybe got past the polish. It is still a very close race, but losing a race isn't necessarily a recipe for getting in Donald Trump's good graces.
A lot of saber rattling today by the likes of Steve Bannon, and Kari Lake has made some alluded to possible lawsuits and things like that. What do you think the next week or so holds for us?
Yeah, let's talk about that, because we should note Arizona has a new recount law, an automatic recount law that is triggered when the margin between two candidates is at 0.5 percentage points, 0.5 percentage points of the total vote in an election. So right now that's about 13,000 votes, a difference of 13,000 votes. Katie Hobbs leads Kari Lake right now by 20,000 votes. It is conceivable that that margin could fall to 13,000 or less. We don't know. There's really a jumble of counties that have to report. Some favor Hobbs, some favor Lake, some are just toss-ups. So it is possible it could fall below 13,000, in which case an automatic recount would be triggered. That would happen after the votes are canvassed by the Secretary of State in early December, and might not be completed until the middle of December. So while we might have a governor-elect, that election would not be confirmed for another month or so, possibly. Inauguration is in early January. That's not great. Let's talk about the lawsuit. The Republican National Committee lawyers have been gathering evidence they believe that could produce a lawsuit based on the printer problem at Maricopa County voting centers. On Election Day, they claim that disenfranchised a lot of voters. They're trying to find the voters who say they were disenfranchised to bring them to court and for their lawsuit. We'll see if that happens. According to a Washington Post report today, the Brain Trust, the Lake Brain Trust, other Republicans were divided on what to do next. Do you want to keep fighting, or do you want to go out gracefully?
Well, I would say that maybe some voters in Arizona were looking for the grace but couldn't find it. And on the far right, it is very tough to find that grace. I'm not talking about moderate Republicans. I'm talking about the extreme side of that party. And that seems to be the side that either was outnumbered or changed its mind. Somewhere along the line, sanity prevailed.
Sanity prevailed. Again, these are very close races. You don't need that many voters, relatively speaking, to prevail. Typically, Democrats will peel off about 10% of Republicans, maybe more of independents. They need that to win an election because Democrats lag in voter registration compared to Republicans. They need a broad coalition to win elections. That's what clearly happened this time. We saw it happen for Mark Kelly in the Senate race in 2020, and really Kyrsten Sinema was the model for that kind of coalition in her 2018 Senate run when she was elected the first Democratic senator in 32 years. So there is a formula, but this race was so unusual, with such stark contrasts between the candidates, and with a population of voters that's been buffeted by the pandemic, by economic issues, inflation, high prices for gas, for groceries. And then you layer on the whole democracy question, a fight for the future of democracy. That's a lot to weigh as you check off boxes on your ballot.
And sometimes you can go out with your friends and say, absolutely, I'm voting Republican straight down the ticket. But then when you are actually sitting at home and you start thinking about those questions and you reflect on January 6th and the horrible sight that we saw at our nation's capital and the audit and everything else that's gone into this, maybe you say to yourself in your own private moment, I can't do this. I cannot do this.
You know, this is my 9th election cycle in Arizona, and I've learned, you know what? People make decisions when they vote for all kinds of reasons.
Yeah.
All kinds of reasons. You might remember back a month or two ago, Kari Lake was at a forum for Latino voters. And
Katie Hobbs.
Katie Hobbs and Kari Lake were at a forum for Latino voters. And Katie Hobbs had a very difficult time answering a question about what Latinos bring to Arizona. I've heard from voters who saw that and said, that's it, I'm not voting for her. And honestly, that's all it can take in an election. Something like that will do it for somebody. Or somebody will say, yeah, I saw Kari Lake on Phoenix TV News for 25 years. I liked her. You know this. Folks out there, we thank you for it. They welcome us into their homes. And if you welcome us into your home, it probably means you like us.
We like you,
yeah.
Right? Do you think, looking back on her run for office, that Kari Lake had a Michael Dukakis moment that spelled doom for her? Or do you think that in the end it just came right down to Election Day?
That's a good question. I wouldn't say there was a Michael Dukakis moment. Maybe it was moments, but clearly her attack on the McCains was not a good idea, whether it was honest or, duplicitous, not genuine. But attacking the McCain family here, we saw this during the funeral for John McCain 4 years ago, the outpouring of support and respect for the man and his family. And John McCain did not make everybody happy. He had his enemies. But it was so striking to see how Arizona really came together. And no matter which side folks were on, there was a lot of respect for John McCain. And Kari Lake, who's been in politics about a minute compared to John McCain, right away went after McCain and said some really, really tough things about John McCain. And that just wasn't a good idea, especially, for those 10% of Republicans who might peel off and vote for Democrats. And we saw more than ever before in this traditionally red state, which is now solidly purple, we saw as never before Republicans coming out, doing TV ads, doing news conferences for the Democratic candidate, going public with it. That's how offended, disturbed, concerned they were about Kari Lake and her campaign. And the attacks on the McCain family were right up there.
Of course, she echoed what Donald Trump had said about John McCain, too. So John McCain was not someone that Trump spoke highly of. You may remember famously or infamously, he said, I don't support losers, and he was a loser.
I like my hero veterans who weren't captured.
Weren't POWs, yeah. I want to take a look at a couple of the other races, and then I have a couple of more questions for you, and then we'll wrap things up. First of all, the race for Attorney General, still too close to call. Chris Mays with a very, very slight lead over Abe Hamadeh. Any thoughts on this, Bram?
That race is clearly in the recount zone. I did the math earlier. I think Chris Mays is up by about 3,000 votes, so that's solidly within the recount zone with 58,000 left to go. This is unpredictable again, given the mix of ballots I just described from different places. It's harder to predict, It's harder to do the ballot math we've all been doing for the last few days when you have that kind of jumble of outstanding uncounted ballots.
All right, and Superintendent of Public Instruction, you have Tom Horn, who once held the office, and right now he has a slight lead over the incumbent, Katie Hoffman. Is this in the recount zone?
This is still in the recount zone. Just doing the math over there, looks like they're separated by 5,000 votes. 230, 225, yeah, I'll stick with that, 5,000 votes. And Katie Hoffman has lagged the other Democratic candidates on the ticket, and I believe she is suffering from pandemic backlash. Parents upset about how schools handled
blaming
the pandemic
her
and their kids, blaming her, the CRT that's been put out there by Republicans, which is not taught in public schools, the gender issues that have become part of the culture war among Republicans. I believe she is paying a price for that. Tom Horn left office as Attorney General in disgrace, frankly. Did not have a very reputable run in his first 2 terms as education, school superintendent, and then as Attorney General. But here he is back again at the age of 78, I believe. And he might end up serving as school superintendent again. But this one is likely headed for a recount.
All right, last question, then we're going to wrap things up.
Sure.
Where does the Arizona Republican Party go from here? Kelly Ward today learned that her phone records can be subpoenaed and viewed by the January 6th committee. We've had this huge loss by one Republican candidate after another. How does the Arizona Republican Party rebuild?
I don't know where they go. We know the Arizona Republican Party here is one of the hardcore Trump parties. I'm not sure where they go. This is a devastating defeat. They had people, close to the party who kept promising there's a pot of gold in those ballots. Don't worry, hang on, hang in there. We're going to come back. There's a lot of ballots for Kari Lake still left. And there weren't. There just weren't. Fincham lost. They might suffer some other defeats lower down on the ticket. They lost a Senate race for the 3rd time in 4 years. That, for many Republicans, is unforgivable, maybe more unforgivable than losing the governor's office. That's on Kelly Ward's watch as Arizona Republican Party chair. Hard to see how she survives. The question is, will the party go even more to the right or stay where they are? The party right now is led by so many individuals and candidates on the far right that I find it hard to believe they'll move back to the center. I'll add one thing. Don't lose sight of our state legislature, because on the Senate side, you have some hardcore promoters of the election lie. As Senate President, as Senate Majority Leader, and you may know the name Wendy Rogers, she is going to be running the Elections Committee. So you can see a lot of tough legislation coming out of there, but with Katie Hobbs in the governor's office on the 9th floor, you're going to see a lot of vetoes in this coming session. Hard to know what this legislature can get done, especially with that leadership in the Senate, if they can even agree on anything with a Governor Katie Hobbs.
Or maybe in a stroke of sanity, they go, maybe the middle's not so bad. Or moving not even all the way to the middle, but just slightly to the middle. We could have won this election had we done that, had we not stayed so extreme to the right.
They could have. You had 4 or 5 candidates who could have done that.
But didn't.
They didn't,
Yep.
and they didn't for a reason.
Yep. All right.
Here we are.
Bram, great stuff as always. Lots more coming up for you later on tonight on 12 News at 10. For Bram Resnick, I'm Mark Curtis. Thanks for joining us for this special report on the Arizona gubernatorial race, which has now been called for Katie Hobbs.